Our journey begins. It is day 137, October 15, 2024, and today I'm going to be talking about in this new language development, going over the Morain language from the Culture series, Iain Banks' The Culture series, and I'm only on the use of weapons in terms of the series, in terms of reading it, so please try not to give me too many spoilers, but I did one fascinating concept about that science fiction series is the use of this language called the Morain language, because the culture in that series is sort of this idea of a group of people who sort of, instead of being like a government or a society, it's like they're just like a culture that like permeates, and they like supposedly, it's basically utopian. They have these giant megaships that are like the size of planets basically, and they have like everything you can imagine on them, and they've sort of solved, it's sort of a solved world, as Nick Bostrom would say. So in that, they have this like basically solved language, this language that is perfect for, and in one interesting aspect specifically, and this isn't going to be spoilers, not necessarily, but specifically in the Player of Games book, they talk about how when he learned a new language as he was trying to learn the game of the society, his mind started to work differently. And you can see this has been thought through in books like, and movies like The Arrival and whatnot, where, and even, I forget, but she was talking about, she did like a TED Talk and whatnot on this, about how different cultures and different languages perceive time differently, perceive space differently based on their language, even down to like the color of blue that they perceive. This is in Germany. They have like they have like a different term for like two slightly different blues that we wouldn't necessarily recognize that don't speak the language. So I wanted to kind of dive into, is there anything that we can learn from this language in implementation of trying to build out a better language now? And I know the concept of even trying to build out a better language is like, why are you working on that? Like, aren't there bigger problems to solve in the world? But it's such a fundamental thing that it'll help with a lot of the big problems that I am trying to solve in the world. And I don't know, if it's interesting and it seems like it could be important, there's a chance it's important. I know it seems a little egotistical to think that I could somehow create a better language than already exists, but I'm on that journey right now, and at least I'm learning things. That's the way I think about it. All right, so let's get into it, and I have this up here. So this is my my Notion with some of the breakdown information, and this is sort of an overview from online. So let's start with the Wikipedia page on the Morain language, which is essentially Morain is the culture's shared constructed language. The culture believes that a hypothesis that language influences thought. So apparently that's Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, that language influences thought, which it is, again, I think pretty obvious, but yeah, it's somewhat controversial. That language, and Morain was designed by early minds, and minds are the basically AIs, to exploit this effect while also appealing to poets, pedants, engineers, and programmers. Wow, that's really interesting. See, this is exactly what I'm saying, is this Iain Banks imagining a science fiction utopian future. What is something that he thought through? He thought through, well, they're probably going to be using an advanced language that works really well for a lot of the things that make utopian futures possible. And so that includes things like appealing to poets, like making it a beautiful language that appeals to engineers and programmers so you can accomplish and coordinate better, and whatnot. So yeah, and basically the story behind is that they use the language as sort of elegant and sophisticated, and it allows, and obviously this is a little bit science fiction, but it allows for just the thought process of how you're thinking about things to be basically in tune with the language that you are speaking daily. So designed to be represented either in binary or symbol written form, Morain is also regarded as aesthetically pleasing language. The symbols of the Morain alphabet can be displayed in 3x3 grids of binary yes, no, black, white dots, and thus corresponds to 9-bit wide binary numbers. Related comments are made by the narrator and the player of games regarding gender-specific pronouns, which Morain speakers do not use in typical conversation unless specifying one's gender is necessary, and by gender reflection to the fact that Morain places much less structural emphasis. And they also do like concepts of possession. And this is very similar. We might get into this later about the language that they use in the dispossessed, where they have a lot less emphasis on possession, and ownership in tune with that, and then dominance and submission, and especially aggression. So this is like sort of the use of your language. If you don't need to be aggressive in your culture, then you don't really need a language structure to support that. And that's sort of what I think we need. Like, you can reverse engineer that in different ways. You can think about it like we need to be able to build megastructures to be able to explore the universe. So what are you going to need to do that? You're going to need some advanced language. You can't be there saying, how fast does it go? Like, I don't know, that's too simple, but basically, like, you're going to need a comparably sophisticated language. And this, I'd like to see what that looks like, the way that they're describing the symbols, because that's interesting, because I've been trying to think through the symbology. Many of these concepts would, in fact, be somewhat theoretical to the average culture citizen, meaning that like they don't really think about it. Indeed, the presence of these concepts in other civilizations signify the brutality and hierarchy associated with the forms of empire. Morain itself is also open to encryption and dialect-specific implementations for different parts of the culture. Exactly, like that's the way I envision this new language being as well, where you would have some of those dialect changes, but it would always be the root self-organization to make sense of it. M1 is basic non-airy Morain. The 3x3 grid, all culture citizens can communicate in this variant. Other variants include M8 through M16, which are encrypted by various degrees and typically used by contact section. Higher level encryptions exist. This said, okay. All right. So, and then there's this, but that's a good enough overview for now. So basically, let's get into it about thinking about some of these things. So the goal is to integrate the articulate, beautiful, and sophisticated qualities of Morain, the language from the culture series, into New Lang. Morain is renowned for its precision, aesthetic harmony, and expressiveness, reflecting the advanced, highly articulate, elegant language. Now, it's like, okay, yeah, like, sure, elegant, highly articulate. But, like, what does that mean? What does it mean to be elegant? And I've been thinking more about that, like, aesthetically pleasing comes down to how the symbology looks, comes down to the harmony of how you say the phonetics that you're using. And I think when you say sophisticated, that's almost like a cultural thing, but I would say not oversimplified. I don't know. Morain, cultural refinement as a tool for communication, but as an art form as well. And that's where I think we already do that. Like, poets use language to create poetry. It's like an art form. If you could always be in that state of creating language as an art form, I don't know, that would probably get too overwhelming, but yeah, I'm not exactly sure. So the core requirements are going to be articulation and clarity. The language must prioritize precision in its vocabulary and grammar, which is exactly what I'm trying to do very precise lexicon, very precise syntax. Each word should have a specific meaning. It's exactly what I'm doing with minimal ambiguity. I'm doing minimal ambiguity in terms of each word, each syllable, and then minimal ambiguity when it comes to overall conceptual meanings from sentence or paragraph or book, where it's a probability collapsing of what is the most likely probability of what you're trying to say. So when you say sophisticated syntax, New Lang should have a sophisticated structure that allows for articulate expression of complex and abstract ideas. These would involve recursion and modularity, where sentences can be nested and layered, conveyed nuanced philosophical and emotional depth. And this is coming down to the structure, I think, of how it sort of explodes in your mind of the meaning behind things, how it's laid out in your mind as you're hearing things. I think this comes down to the mental model framework that I've been thinking through, and the general structure, philosophical depth. New Lang should enable discussions of highly abstract, existential, and philosophical ideas. I mean, obviously, like, how do you exactly do that? Because, like, English, all that, has a lot of the words that we use. But then sometimes we often say that the word is overused. Like, we need to define the word better. And I think that's where a way of structuring the language where you can add better affixes to different terminology. So instead of saying AI for everything, for example, you could have different terminology for different types of AI based on the linkage, almost like a compound word. But you wouldn't want it to get too complicated. I'm just thinking through it. And then efficiency and flexibility. The language should remain efficient in conveying meaning, polished and refined. So the methodology is going to come down to the phonetic design, using soft consonants, harmony, smooth flowing, all of that basic stuff. The lexicon development, unambiguous meanings, exactly, root words, sophisticated grammar. Yeah, like I said, mostly, so the grammar, I'm still thinking through the grammar, because our minds are only so capable of the way that we think about things. But there's like, 4 different common ways of like SVO, OVS, all the different subject, object, verb variants. And so everyone's already capable of thinking about these things in different orders. And so I think you can take that even further by thinking about things in globally different orders. And it's hard to express what I'm saying, but it's going to come down to like mental models, sharing of common mental models, and then being able to convey mental models that people then use. Emphasis on emotional and philosophical depth, aesthetic and articulate feedback. The challenges are going to be balancing articulation with efficiency. There's going to be a lot of cognitive load, and there's going to be cultural transferability. And I realized I did not scroll through this, so if you'd like to see, this is what I was reading, basically. And again, that's objective, core requirements, methodology, challenges, etc. So what's the takeaway? The takeaway is essentially that I'd say the main takeaway is like when you're thinking about creating the best world possible, like the culture series is sort of this representation of what could happen when the world becomes the best place possible, and there are trillions of beings and billions of beings who are like living really, really great lives, is a likely component of that is going to be constructing a language which is in sync with that sort of thinking and that sort of being. And I think assuming that we're going to use the same languages that we've been using for hundreds and thousands of years, I don't think that doesn't strike me nearly as likely as saying, yeah, somebody's going to create a constructed mind. Now, in the culture series, the minds created the constructed language. And so the minds are obviously really advanced. They can do all these calculations in their head. to figure out the perfect language. I've certainly thought about it a lot, but I'm only human. I'm not going to think about everything. So obviously, the one step would be, if you have any thoughts, please let me know. I've been reading through all of your comments, so I really, really appreciate that. And secondly, it's going to be like, we'll try. And if it has self-organizing principles and the ability to evolve, then we can continue to evolve it and self-organize it into becoming that final language. Because likely either way, it's going to need to be a slow progression, because humans are going to need to be able to progress. I don't know, taking a full jump to like talking in clicks or something would be too jarring of a jump. Now, you would think that any language you would still be able to speak it, and you would still be able to write it and type it out. So you'd think some of those common building blocks would create that any language really is going to look or be, because it's going to have those similar building blocks, we're all going to be able to use it. But I think some of the aspects that I'm thinking about, like the collapsing of probability, I'm not sure humans innately are going to have that immediately. And so building up of that over time, it's going to probably have to happen. All right. Thank you so much. I'll see you tomorrow.